Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. I'm Edward Juregin. I'm the founding director of the Baker Institute, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Baker Institute this morning. Over the last 2 decades, North America has been viewed as a declining natural resource base, where domestically produced oil, natural gas, and renewable energy would have difficulty keeping up with rising demand for energy. Americans have voiced concerns about energy supply, pricing, and security. In light of Iran's recent threat to block the Strait of Hormuz and rising oil prices, energy security once again is currently a major concern. However, the American energy industry is experiencing a true renaissance in the North American natural gas market, and oil could be next. This business boom has been driven by American ingenuity and technological innovation. It has focused primarily on vast, unconventional resources spread across the continent, but also has included renewable energy. In geopolitical terms, increasing the production of energy domestically portends a possible, I want to stress possible, shift of the center of gravity in the energy world away from the volatile Middle East toward the Americas by the 2020s. This would be a paradigm shift with positive consequences for the United States and the world economy. In line with the mission of the Baker Institute's energy program, we have gathered together here today some of the top national experts and energy sector leaders on North American natural resources and environmental issues to help raise the level of public discussion about energy in the United States. Our goal is both to highlight the vast endowment of natural resources coming to the forefront in North American energy markets and to discuss the policy challenges associated with their large-scale development. As turmoil spreads across the Middle East, the need for a coherent energy policy in the Americas is reaching critical importance. How long have we been searching for a coherent energy policy in this country? Americans want and need to learn more about improving our potential energy options and the environmental consequences of increasingly available fuels. It is imperative that the American public have a better understanding of the emerging policy trade-offs between the need for secure energy supplies to fuel our daily lives and our economy, and increased awareness of the need for environmental stewardship toward a greener energy program. I would like to thank PFC Energy, especially its chairman and CEO, Robin West, and Mr. William Howard, a Rice University alumnus and chairman of CEO of Houston Plating and Coatings, LLC, for their support for this summit. I would also like to thank ConocoPhillips for its continuing and generous support of Baker Institute research on this important topic. We also appreciate the excellent work of my Baker Institute Energy Fellows here, Amy Myers-Jaffe and Ken Medlock, who are really the leaders of our Energy Forum and have brought it to new heights, and their research associate, Kylie Miller, for her help in organizing today's program. We are delighted to have 2 distinguished speakers providing opening addresses this morning. First, Peter Lehner, Executive Director of the Natural Resources Defense Council, followed by Dr. John Deutsch, Emeritus Institute Professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, who will be joining us by video conference. As Executive Director of the NRDC, one of the nation's most influential and respected environmental advocacy organizations, Peter Lehner manages more than 350 dedicated professionals in 7 offices across the world and guides NRDC's policy positions and advocacy strategies. Peter assumed his role as Executive Director of NRDC in 2006. Professor John Deutsch served as Director of Central Intelligence under President Bill Clinton from 1995 to 1996. He is an Emeritus Institute Professor at MIT. He has been a member of the MIT faculty since 1970 and has served as chairman of the Department of Chemistry, Dean of Science, and Provost. He is also a member of the National Petroleum Council, and he chaired the Natural Gas Subcommittee of the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Peter Lehner to the podium.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction and for inviting me to this conference. It's an honor to be here at the Baker Institute. This organization's groundbreaking research and analysis are helping on some of our nation's toughest issues today, including energy policy. And it's fitting that we're gathered here in Texas to discuss America's energy future. Texas has, of course, led the nation in oil development, but in a development relevant to my remarks today, Texas also produces more wind power than any other state in the country. A few months ago, Austin became the largest, there's a hole in the desk here, became the largest city in the country to power all of its facilities by clean energy. And not to be outdone, Houston purchases an even larger amount of renewable energy. So congratulations to both cities. Today, we've been asked to explore what the event organizers have called the vast endowment of natural resources in North American energy markets. And while those natural resources include tremendous supplies of wind, solar, geothermal, and other renewable energy, the focus today is on fossil fuels. And I should say it's an honor for me to share this opening with Don Deutsch. I looked at the video screen, one of this country's foremost energy experts. He was nice enough to send around an outline of his talk, and it looks like his main points and mine largely overlap. And given my great respect for him, I find great confidence in that. My 3 points would emphasize the need to address climate change implications of all this oil and gas, the reality that the public is turning against fracking, natural gas exploration, very quickly, and that it's up to the industry more than any other player now to decide whether the development of this oil and gas resources will remain everywhere a battle, or whether this newfound oil and gas can be seen to benefit all Americans. In many circles, the apparent abundance of fossil fuel means an affordable engine for economic growth and a cornerstone for energy security, and nothing more. After all, we all need, use, and enjoy affordable energy and would rather it come from ourselves or our friendly allies than elsewhere. However, as I see it, this supply brings with it questions of responsibility as well. Extracting these fuels from the earth routinely creates challenging consequences for our communities, our health, our air, our water, and our wild landscapes. And even if we figure out how to reduce all the negative impacts from producing coal, petroleum, and natural gas, our planet, our one and only planet, simply cannot absorb the results of burning it all. I'm sure that here, away from all the rhetoric of Washington, and in this room filled with smart, evidence-driven people, there really is no doubt about the reality of climate change, or the fact that carbon pollution, largely from the burning of fossil fuels, is causing it. I understand it's politically unpopular to some to admit that out loud. But here, surely, you all know the truth. We are altering our planet in profound and destructive ways. The change has already begun. We're already experiencing more extreme weather. Last year, for example, America got hit by 14 weather events that each created more than $1 billion of damages, an all-time record. Shifting weather patterns are already affecting agriculture. Here in Texas, the droughts and wildfires of the past year have left farmers and ranchers with over $5 billion in losses. And rising temperatures are already endangering our health. Heat waves kill more Americans than any other type of natural disaster, and insects carrying infectious disease are spreading. Similarly, coastal cities, New York, Boston, and even down in Galveston Bay, are already working how to figure out how to keep the sewers flowing and prevent excess flooding with sea level rise. America is already paying the price of climate change. This isn't an opinion, this isn't an ideology, this is scientific fact, and it's economic reality. This climate reality carries with it 2 implications for the newly available oil and gas. First, It is long past time for the oil and gas industry to acknowledge the climate challenge and embrace climate policy. Take the natural gas context, for example. We must have public policies in place to ensure that natural gas will be used to supplant rather than supplement coal use. When burned, natural gas emits about half the carbon dioxide of coal. And power plants fueled by natural gas emit none of the mercury and acid rain pollution produced by coal-burning power plants and can be used in conjunction pretty easily with intermittent renewable resources. Indeed, these critical facts are why many see an expanded role for natural gas in our energy mix, assuming the industry can clean up its act. But without an overarching climate policy to reduce carbon dioxide pollution and full implementation of Clean Air Act rules, gas may not be used to its best advantage to reduce the carbon intensity of our energy. A simple switch from coal to gas will not take us where we need to go to meet the climate challenge. So my message to the industry and their allies is that if you really want this gas to be good for America and not just for your profits, you must take another critical step and acknowledge the reality of climate change and accept limits on carbon dioxide pollution. Instead of fighting the future, it's time for energy companies to help build it. Come to the table and help negotiate over carbon limits. We may not see eye to eye on everything, but we've got to start the dialogue. Use your engineering prowess to explore the possibilities of carbon capture and sequestration and enhanced oil recovery with best environmental standards. And start living up to the PR. Many companies have glossy ad campaigns talking about how green and sustainable they are. It's time to make those slogans a reality and become full-fledged energy companies that innovate in renewables as well as oil and gas, and invest equally in both. And if the energy companies here can't do that in America, then China or some other country is going to bring us into the 21st century of clean energy. Some in Congress want to cede that market to China. I don't. I hope you don't. America's never done that. We've led every technological innovation of the last 100 years, and we should lead this one. But it can only happen with industry's help. The second key implication of taking climate change seriously is that we must use this oil and gas efficiently. Even if less polluting than coal, burning gas still emits carbon dioxide. And the strong consensus of virtually all the world's scientists is that we have to dramatically reduce our carbon dioxide pollution. One of the cheapest, fastest, cleanest ways to reduce carbon pollution is to enhance efficiency. And the danger of all this newly available oil and gas is that it could weaken our efforts to use it carefully and efficiently. If there's plenty of it, why worry? Why not drive wasteful cars and trucks? Why worry about a leaky home or office building? Heck, leave the lights on. The answer, of course, is that even if there is lots of domestic oil and gas, it still pollutes. It still alters our climates. It still causes air pollution. The industry needs to be a force for using fossil fuels carefully, not profligately. I realize energy companies want to sell as much energy as they possibly can. It's your product, and you don't want demand to shrink. But what's best for consumers, for power companies, home builders, homeowners, farmers, and other Americans? The answer? Efficiency helps them. Waste does not. After years of advocacy by NRDC and others, for example, many electric utilities now embrace efficiency. Manufacturers do too. Refrigerators, just as one example, now run better, cost less, and use only a quarter as much electricity as they did in the 70s. Consumers save money, and power companies have been able to defer hugely expensive new generation investments. And in this economy, saving money matters a lot to Americans, especially at the gas pump. As we're about to enter the annual spring spike in gas prices, 60% of Americans believe that adopting a standard of 60 miles a gallon for cars is the most important thing we can do to address high gas prices. And if the oil and gas industry promote fuel efficiency, or at least doesn't support efforts to derail progress we've recently made, you look like an ally for American drivers. And any offset to demand, by the way, will be made up for in Asian markets. But if the industry gets in the way of these increased standards, you look like profiteers. And if you support policies to promote efficiency in transportation, you'll be job creators. A recent study showed that more efficient cars will add 150,000 jobs to the auto industry. Similarly, a recent report by McKinsey capturing all cost-effective energy efficiency opportunities would lower our national energy bill by over $1.2 trillion and create nearly 1 million new jobs. Think how many contractors could be put to work if we decided to make every home, office, and factory as efficient as possible. New York City, where I come from, is now doing that, and we expect to create 17,000 new jobs. And yet you read the papers. Sensible, consensus-based efforts to stop waste in our lighting, buildings, and vehicles are under attack. If this oil and gas is truly to help America, the industry must use its clout to help stop wasting it and help resist these rollback efforts. Now let's shift from talking about how we use the oil and gas to how we get it. We've arrived at a historic moment. Our country is debating our energy future. A century ago, the gusher at Spindletop offered the promise of a fundamental change in our energy mix. Many see shale gas and oil as offering another such possible fundamental change. But today's excitement about oil and gas comes at a time not only of climate change, but also of increasing alternatives. And these new finds come in the wake of a series of industry missteps. The Gulf of Mexico, Nigeria, Ecuador, contaminated oil and water across the United States. And these have cast a dim light on industry for a generation of Americans. Right now, many areas where oil and gas drilling expands become battlegrounds, and the public backlash against irresponsible industry practices grows stronger. Until the industry has an uncompromising reputation for doing it right, for admitting and correcting mistakes where they are made, for accepting oversight by impartial observers and being willing to be held accountable, for putting people ahead of profits, they will have a fight on their hand every time. And if you're here from the petroleum industry and remember only one thing from this talk, I hope it is this: it is up to you. Industry leaders may think they have a pretty good track record on gas and oil extraction. They may say Deepwater Horizon, Yellowstone River, Kalamazoo River pipeline spills, Dimock, Pennsylvania, they're all aberrations. But that's not what America thinks. Consider this. Is it unreasonable for the public to be suspicious when oil and gas drillers won't tell them what's in their fracking fluid? That only makes people assume they're hiding something. If it isn't poisonous, why don't you tell us? Is it unreasonable for citizens to worry when oil and gas extraction has an exemption from the Safe Drinking Water Act and other crucial laws that virtually no other industry enjoys? Is it unreasonable for parents to worry when they see neighbors who become ill after drilling operations nearby or when doctors order them to move away? Is it unreasonable for communities to worry when states have to admit that they only have a few staff members who often lack the training and expertise to oversee complex drilling operations, to monitor what could be thousands of new wells, and to be concerned when rural areas are transformed without their consent or even any debate into industrial areas with thousands of trucks, lights, noise, dirty air, and water? And it is unreasonable for neighbors to be concerned when companies fight every effort to investigate complaints and compensate citizens for polluted air and destroyed property or poisoned drinking water, or when companies take advantage of impoverished areas and entice people to sign leases later viewed as unfair. These worries are not the work of some anti-progress environmentalists. This is not the result of outside interference. What we're seeing is a groundswell of concern coming up from the bottom and crossing political lines and ideologies. What industry really needs to hear is that it has lost the support of the people in many parts of this country. And it's not that the support was taken from them. It's that their behavior has caused sensible, normal people across the country to lose faith. I don't think that's a reputation the industry wants. And it's not only what is happening, but what is not happening that causes concern. Can you really blame people for being suspicious when every effort by civic leaders, government, or the environmental community to reach agreements with the industry to develop reasonable best practices that could offer confidence and faith in safe production of tight gas have stalled out? Small example, efforts led by former Senator Tim Wirth or the federal government to sit down and pull together safeguards that are reasonable both from the industry's perspective and the citizens' perspective have led nowhere. Senator Wirth tried to appeal to common sense and to the bottom line. He's a strong believer in natural gas, but he said that, quote, instead of trying to suggest that the public concerns are not real or are trivial and can be ignored, industry leaders need to come together around a reasonable code of conduct. But nothing came from that effort. The Secretary of Energy's subcommittee on shale gas, commissioned by the President and which John Deutsch chaired, tried to do the same thing. The final report, released in November, presented consensus-based recommendations for industry and government. But so far, these recommendations have led to no real action. And every effort by government to develop adequate standards is limping ahead slowly, hampered by lack of funding and joint effort. Instead of trying to eliminate or eviscerate environmental agencies, if industry wants to move forward without constant battles, it should be doing whatever it can to help these efforts to a successful conclusion. Stop stalling them and trying to ramp special treatment through Congress instead of engaging in honest debate. Surely the oil and gas industry is capable of better. If the fossil fuel companies want to exploit new finds without public distrust and legal battles, they have to come to the table. Hal Harvey, former president of the Energy Foundation and an astute observer of the field, said it well in a recent editorial in the Los Angeles Times. I'm sure many of you already saw it. He said, quote, "On the face of it, natural gas looks terrific. The United States and many other countries have abundant domestic supplies. The cost per delivered unit of energy is about a third of that of oil. It's cheap and fast to build power plants fueled by natural gas. And when it burned, it only emits half the carbon of coal. So what's not to like?" Well, he continued, things are not so simple. Under the best conditions, we may enjoy those benefits, but under more adverse conditions, gas can be a worse generator of greenhouse gas than coal, can wreak massive local environmental destruction, and can undermine energy efficiency and renewable energy. And without a strong set of policies to guide natural gas development, the worst case is far more likely. Hal laid out 5 rules for responsible development of natural gas. Don't allow leaky systems, use gas to phase out coal, have sound drilling and casing standards, don't pollute the landscape with contaminated water, and drill only where it's sensible. These rules are really quite similar to the rules NRDC and other groups have proposed for responsible development of this resource. And they're guided by some basic principles. First, do no harm. Second, stay out of areas where the risks exceed the rewards, and in any area, be responsible. Follow best practices, but also accept government oversight. And it's not just fracking. We see the same situation where doubts harden into resistance in the opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline, where Republican leaders in Nebraska have joined NRDC and others in saying no to a threat to clean water. The fact is, despite the stalemate in Washington, people of all political persuasions, Democrat, Republican, Tea Party, or whatever, care about safe drinking water and protecting their homes and land. And if Americans are going to allow drill pads into their communities, they have to trust the companies' support and are following strict safety guidelines and governed by enforceable laws. While industry watchdogs are a step forward, the reality is that the public knows that industry's job is to look out for industry, and it's only the government that is there to protect them. We need qualified and empowered inspectors and investigators to ensure that the rules are followed. Games need referees, our streets need cops, and our risky operations need government oversight. I would say to the industry that they may still be able to earn that trust. Recall and try not to follow the example of the nuclear power industry, which thoroughly lost the public's confidence, leading to a stoppage of new building. But every day that goes by, it gets harder. And whatever climate benefits there may be in natural gas will be lost as every new well becomes a fight. So let me end by saying that I think we can all agree on the type of world we hope to create for our children. One in which they can live healthy, prosperous lives. One in which they can visit and find solace in the natural world. One in which they can have a job that gives them dignity and a fair living. And I think we can all agree that if we want to build this future for our children, we have to stop wasting our resources today. We need to stop carbon pollution and shift to clean energy that never runs out. And we can also agree that given political and economic realities, we're not going to make this transition to renewable energy overnight. It will take time. But the question is whether we're all working for this transition or whether we're slowing it down and obstructing it. Today, I've tried to lay out some ideas for how the oil and gas industry could become partners in building a more secure and sustainable energy foundation for America. Now is the time for industry leaders to decide whether they will join in that endeavor or whether we'll leave the clean energy future to others, such as China or Germany and elsewhere, and we'll here just fight about the dirty energy. The choice is theirs. Thank you.
the way our competitors everywhere in the world seek to use and find natural gas. The balance in market terms between traditional major resource holders in the Middle East or in Russia has changed by this great expansion of shale gas resources that of course exist not only in North America, but elsewhere in the world, in Latin America, in North Africa, in Russia, China, and elsewhere. So we are going to see a tremendous realignment in the power between those who are using energy and those who are producing energy around the world. I draw your attention to two underlying uncertainties that are of great importance here. The first is whether a global price for natural gas will emerge over the next couple of decades, that we will go as a result of expanded LNG trade and ever increasing pipeline capacity from a situation where we have basically three separate markets, North America, Europe, and Asia for natural gas, to a single gas price throughout the globe. The second uncertainty is whether this completely unusual historic difference in the cost of oil and gas on an energy basis of almost 4-to-1 will continue through the future, or whether technological innovation and market adaptation will lead to greater competition between oil and gas and an invasion of natural gas into traditional liquid markets, first in the power sector, but later into transportation. This disparity over time will cause an increase in the price of gas and a decrease in the price of oil as they compete for common use. The traditional estimates of future gas prices, I believe, do not take into account this competition, certainly those of the Energy Information Administration. The domestic implications are also enormous. Huge job creation, the greatest job creation in Pennsylvania and Ohio that has happened and will happen for some period of time. A tremendous reduction in the amount of imports our country needs, and therefore an improvement in our balance of payments. A dramatic drop in the cost of natural gas for consumers, which benefits all, and a projected increase in this activity of shale gas and oil production over the following years, I believe to 40% of our domestic production by the late 2020s will come from shale gas in this country. It leads one to re-examine the conventional projections about our energy balances for liquid supply and demand in this country in the future. Currently, EIA says that we meet 52% of our liquids demand in this country from imports, and projects that it will fall to 42% by the year 2025. But there are many reasons to believe that because of this explosion in production of shale gas and oil in North America, that we will have a much more favorable liquids balance. Consider the following. The increased domestic production of oil is projected by many to be 500,000 to 1 million barrels per day higher than what EIA projects in its reference case. We count Canadian imports as being imports to the United States, when in fact they are part of the North American energy market and could well be considered regional production rather than as imports. I frankly find Canadians as reliable as Californians at providing us with energy. So you should not include the Canadians in that import dependence. Perhaps there will be greater than expected production of biofuels for transportation. And I recall that we are still significant exporters of petroleum products which could be cut back in times of need. In any case, a very conservative look at the EIA projections suggests that our import dependence could fall for liquid fuels to below 30%, to the high 20s, by the year 2025. That is a very small distance from the 20% that most observers mean would really is equivalent to practical energy independence because of our ability to take into account a reduction of that amount. So we have a complete change in the historic view that we are helplessly dependent on energy imports, oil imports going forward, and that indeed we see that our region, the North American region, are not only going to become more influential in world oil and gas markets as time goes on, but also that we are going to be better able to meet our energy needs going forward in the future. And natural gas has an enormous potential at substituting for oil use over time in the economy. Well, what is the challenge? The greatest threat to realizing this opportunity is public opposition to the adverse environmental impact of unconventional gas, shale gas and shale oil production. And I want to say that there are indeed serious environmental impacts. They have to do with air quality, they have to do with water quality, and they have to do with community impacts both on a short and longer term basis. And as shale production grows, perhaps to hundreds of thousands of wells over the next decade across the country, this public concern will also grow. And it's not just about hydraulic fracturing itself, it is about the entire environmental impact of the shale production process. Unfortunately, the public concern began with the issue of disclosure of the chemical composition of fracturing fluids. Industry got off on the wrong foot by refusing to disclose the composition of the chemicals that are put into fracturing fluid, less than 1%, of course, by volume or weight of the hydraulic fracturing fluids. Indeed, our committee came to the conclusion that there are few, if any, documented cases of fracturing fluids leaking from where they are injected into shale resources to drinking water reservoirs. And despite the fact that industry has withdrawn its opposition and regulators are beginning to move towards requiring full disclosure of fracturing fluid composition, it remains the single largest public concern about hydraulic fracturing and shale gas production. It should not be so, but it is the case. President Obama in March directed Secretary Chu to establish a subcommittee of the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board, which I chaired, to examine ways to reduce the environmental impacts of shale gas production. We considered shale gas production overall, not just the hydraulic fracturing aspect. We made 20 recommendations in our report of August of this year, covering air emissions, water management, and community impacts. I do not want this morning to burden you with the discussion of those recommendations. I would just like to mention two. The first is that the subcommittee judged that the issue of water management, managing water as a system in these hydraulic fracturing production facilities, is not going forward on a complete cradle-to-grave approach. It is not looked at as a systems problem. It is done by a combination of state and federal regulation. Some items are not regulated at all, so that you do not have a way to focus on managing the water quality from its acquisition as water for fracturing, its collection, its storage, both the water which is produced and the flowback water. The composition of this water is not tracked. There are not significant rules going forward for how to manage the disposal of that water. All of this has to be looked at as a system. The Environmental Protection Agency is now undertaking a study that will not lead to results until 2014, and then there will have to be a rulemaking activity. All of this is taking place at too slow a pace. As a second example, let me turn to a point correctly raised by Peter Lerner. At the present time, the global warming footprint of natural gas production and use in the United States is not adequately studied or understood. The amount of natural gas which is put into the atmosphere from the production process is in debate, with vastly different estimates, very much argued between experts. The amount of natural gas which is flared or vented in the production, the use of the loss of natural gas during transportation, and then its use is a subject which is very important to study in its entirety so that one does have a proper appraisal of the global climate change aspects of natural gas. Right now, it is a matter of argument rather than of fact. Our subcommittee was unanimously of the view that the environmental challenges of hydraulic fracturing when used at scale in this country are serious, and absent serious attention and visible progress to reducing these impacts, the future expansion of shale gas development and its production is at risk. Well, what needs to be done? Evidently, everyone agrees that regulatory standards have to be set by independent authorities and who have the capacity to represent the public interest and do their regulatory responsibilities well. However, the process, as it's currently underway, is very oriented towards procedure, not focused on solving the system issues such as the water management example that I mentioned, with tremendous complexity, considerable friction between state regulators and the EPA for private lands. And what we have is a situation where the public's confidence, seeing the potential expansion of this activity, is not being changed from one of doubt and attention to episodic examples to one of confidence that the process is going forward in a systematic way which will, over time, meet the needs of the American people and reduce environmental damage. Greater emphasis has got to be given to providing quality technical and economic information into this standard-setting process. Well, what is the way forward? I mentioned in the paper that I hope you have available to you there that there are three paths that the country can follow. The first is to muddle through. That describes perhaps best what we are doing today. It says that we have to deal with the regulatory situation as it exists, the differences between state and national responsibilities. We have to work through the procedural process. And anyway, it's so hard to change that regulatory regime that its only realistic thing to do is to work your way through it. The second option is to think about a much more aggressive regulatory oversight system to be placed over hydraulic shale production. Now, this sounds perhaps reasonable to some people, but there are two very difficult aspects to it. The first is that saying that you're going to give more regulatory authority does not mean that you have found a practical way to focus on solving environmental problems and focusing on systems issues as opposed to just setting new mandates and prescriptive rules. The second is that the debates between the states and the EPA now are so full of friction that it would not be possible to imagine a political process that would come to some reasonable rebalancing of the responsibilities between the states and the national government on this issue. The third course, and the course which is what I want to advocate to your consideration here today, was a viewpoint put forward by our subcommittee for industry to take a much more proactive role within the regulatory framework to explain and to commit themselves to reducing the environmental impacts of shale production over time. This is the approach that was favored by our subcommittee, and it is one which is summarized in the idea of measure certain key indicators of environmental production, disclose the results of those measurements to the public, and commit to continuous improvement in those environmental indicators over time, of those selected environmental indicators over time. There are three reasons why this approach recommends itself. The first is measurement, disclosure, and improvement is based on using engineering field experience in the different shale plays and regions around the country for both improving the efficiency of the operation and in its environmental effects. We have indeed seen such an example in the move from single well drilling to multiple wells off of pads, for example in the Marcellus, as a way which improved the operations of the production process and also reduced some of the key environmental impact variables considerably, like a 60% reduction in the number of truck trips required for the mat versus single well drilling. Secondly, hydraulic fracturing at today's scale is a relatively new technology, and if its history is of any guide, one could expect tremendous advances will come over the coming years from the oil and gas companies and the service companies towards better and more efficient drilling and environmental operation. The improvement in the efficiency of the operation will be accompanied by environmental advantage. Here's an example. If you use seismic near real-time data collection, you can much better engineer the location, frequency, and amount of fracturing that you do on a job to maximize production. Our estimates are that over time you could reduce water use by a factor of 2 to 4 in the production of shale gas. All of that has tremendous environmental impact. And seeing that that technology advances in front of us is a reason for presenting to the public the fact that continuous improvement is going to occur from the activities, from the experience of today. So the public will say, we're going to see a way of measuring improvement over time and a reduction of the impacts as we go forward. Now, I want to say that this approach is not simple. There's great diversity in the different shale plays around the country requiring different approaches. There needs to be an agreement between independent regulators and industry about where to start, on what measurements to make, and how to report them, and how to collect information, and how to ensure compliance. I know that there are great differences within industry between the different companies and the way they carry out their work. But the answer is that this should go forward because it is the only way to get the public to believe that this activity is going to not only benefit it through jobs and through security over time, but also will reduce the environmental burdens. Industry is exploring, in fact, ways of going forward. It's placing much greater emphasis on best practice. But let me say to you that best practice is not what I am proposing to you. What I am proposing to you is best practice accompanied by measurements from the field to support a chain which says the impacts are going down over time. Best practices without measurements is not the answer. It's best practices with measurements. It's a difficult road forward, but I want to say, in my judgment, it is the best possible way to see this tremendous benefit, this tremendous, really, fortune for the people of North America and the United States to be realized. I conclude by saying that, taken as a whole, one cannot characterize the country's response to this unconventional oil and gas opportunity as either effective or enlightened. In the distant past, another promising energy technology, nuclear power, stumbled because of lack of attention to issues of waste management and safety that concerned the public. In the more recent past, deep offshore oil production came close to extinction because of poor engineering practice and regulatory insight. I do not want to see this happen to unconventional oil and gas production in the United States, and the best way I know to avoid this possibility is for industry, highly capable and certainly motivated by good economic returns, to step up and do the environmental job better. Thank you very much for your attention, and again, I apologize for not being with you. Thank you. Word.
Good morning. Due to the time we have and the very interesting comments by both of our first speakers, we felt that it would be best to move to the second panel, and we will cover the many of the issues raised and the important facts brought forward during the rest of the day, and morning, and the afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Susan Farrell. I'm with PFC Energy, and I have the pleasure this morning to begin with the first of our panels here and to present our speakers to you. And after that, I'd like to put a few facts in front of you to frame the discussion. First of all, and I will introduce them each as they come up more fully, but just so you know who's sitting here, to your far left is Mr. James Carter, who is a retired president and chief operating officer of Syncrude Canada. Sitting next to him is James Mulva, the president and CEO and chairman, rather, of ConocoPhillips. And then we have Dr. Juan Jose Suarez Capel, Director General of Pemex. What I'd like to do first is just to frame with a few slides on what we view as the energy potential in North America. If you look at the early 70s, that was the peak of the U.S. oil and gas production. We were at about 22 million barrels a day when you look at all of the liquids. So in the bar chart here, we have oil on the bottom, gas in the middle, and gas liquids in the top. 22 million barrels a day. That was our heyday. Then we started declining. And by the time we got to 2011, or this past year, we were again on the increase, but not quite back to the peak of the early 1970s. So here we're comparing the US, which was about 19.3 million barrels a day of oil equivalent, lower than Russia, which was over 22, and then much bigger actually in total than Saudi Arabia. We sometimes don't think about that because we think of oil only, but when you look at oil and gas, certainly a more significant producer than Saudi Arabia. And we had started to produce ethanol, so 1 million barrels a day of liquids coming from ethanol in the US. As we forecast forward to 2020, something quite remarkable is happening. The U.S. is set to become the single largest country producer of oil and gas, and we're cheating a little bit with ethanol here, we know that, in the world. So we'll be neck and neck with Russia, even when you take out ethanol. We will have surpassed our peak production of the early 1970s. This truly is a renaissance, and it has enormous implications going forward, and we're going to be talking about that throughout the rest of the day. The reason we are able to do that is because of shale oil and shale gas. So we have increases in both oil and gas coming from shale. About a third by 2020 is our forecast. But we do have a few other things that are still not quite where they were before. This is a chart of the US Gulf of Mexico Deepwater, and the number of companies in the yellow bar is pre-moratorium in 2009 who spudded new wells. The blue bars, and you can see how many fewer there are the number of companies which spudded new wells, not going back into old wells, but new wells, between the post-moratorium and November 2011. Many fewer companies are playing in this space. Why is this important? Because the US Gulf of Mexico Deepwater is the second largest, most important province for reserves after Brazil, number 2 in the world after Brazil, and we've really fallen down. And the implication of that is that the number of announced new discoveries in the Deepwater has concomitantly fallen dramatically. So this also has an important policy implications going forward, and the pace at which it resumes will impact the total oil and gas production, of course, mostly oil. The other big growth story in North America, of course, is Canada, and we have one of the world's experts here to talk about that with us as well. This is PFC Energy's forecast of oil sands out to 2020, and you see it's really exponential growth coming out of the oil sands. And when we break it into two pieces, and this is the last slide just for framing, we see both the mined oil sands growing, which is what has been producing so far pretty much, and also serious growth in the in-situ oil sands. So again, large production coming from north of the border. So when you look at the total North American energy picture, you see policy issues, environmental regulation, you see big infrastructure questions. Aside from the major pipeline, which will be a subject of discussion, what do you actually build in order to have all of this new oil and gas produced and delivered to market? So with that, I would like to turn to our first speaker, Mr. James Mulva. Mr. Mulva is currently chairman and CEO of ConocoPhillips and has been for a very long time. He joined Phillips Petroleum in 1973 and became its chief financial officer in 1990 and part of the company's management committee. He became chairman and CEO in 1999. Mr. Mulva received a BBA and MBA in finance from the University of Texas, and he has served also as chairman of the American Petroleum Institute and as a member of the Board of Visitors for the MD Anderson Cancer Center and the Business Council. Please welcome Mr. Mulva.
Thank you, Susan. So I've been doing it a long time. Are you telling me something? Actually, I was thinking today about when I joined the energy industry some 38 years ago. Back then, no one would have believed that in 2012, we'd be talking about some of the topics that are on today's agenda. Specifically, shale gas, tight oil, and oil sands, but not as pie-in-the-sky future sources that still need technological miracles to be viable. Instead, they are contributing today in major and in growing volumes from the slides that Susan just showed you. We are, in fact, well into an industrial revolution to some extent outlined by John Deutsch, one that represents the biggest oil industry breakthroughs since the 1940s, when we first moved offshore and into the Gulf of Mexico. A new frontier was awaiting us then, and it provided much of the energy that was needed to power the post-World War II economic boom that we experienced in our country. And today we are entering other frontiers. And once again, our country in North America, benefiting from a new abundance of energy, job creation, and economic stimulation. We've all heard the descriptions of this transformative event called shale gas revolution. Its speed and extent has surprised everyone, including the best and brightest in our industry, in government, academia, the public, NGOs, and just about everyone. And that revolution is now progressing into the next stage, tight oil. Meanwhile, the Canadian oil sands are also developing rapidly after decades of fits and starts. They represent, in many respects, a revolution of their own. And as a result, our entire understanding of North America energy potential is changing pretty quickly. Everyone is having to cast aside some old assumptions, such as the one about domestic fossil fuels being in short supply. They are not. And the one about America being trapped by growing dependence on uncertain sources of energy imports. We now have the resources and technology to change that in a significant way. An energy bonanza lies within our reach if we only take full advantage of the unconventional resources right beneath our feet. In the case of natural gas, we can now foresee meeting our energy needs throughout our lifetimes, as well as those of our children, grandchildren, and beyond. And for oil, there are signs that we can meet a majority of our needs from sources right here in North America. But like they say, there is always a catch to accomplishing all of this. To capture this potential, we need government to play a more constructive role, one that reflects balance between potential energy sources and balance between energy needs and environmental and climate protection. If we can get that, then a number of goals will be within our reach, among them national energy security, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve balance of trade, job creation, and economic growth. I'll get back to that policy issues here shortly. First, let's look at the scale of unconventional resources revolution. So I'm going to start with natural gas. As recently as the 1980s, this was considered a sunset industry in the United States. Domestic production, reserves, and demand were all falling. Proved reserves bottomed in 1973 at 162 trillion cubic feet. That was the lowest since 1946, less than an 8-year supply. Since then, reserves are up 68%, and production is rising right along with it. But that's only the beginning. The Energy Information Administration now estimates that the U.S. recoverable gas resources total 2,700 TCF, more than a century of supply. We have plenty of natural gas available for homes, schools, factories, power plants, and fleet vehicles. The improved supply is thanks to our newfound ability to produce gas from shale source rocks. The turnaround is so dramatic that we at ConocoPhillips now refer to natural gas as nature's gift. Meanwhile, the revolution has spread also to domestic oil production, and it may track the path it followed with natural gas. We just don't know yet the full extent of this, but it certainly looks very promising. For example, U.S. oil reserves peaked in 1970. By 2008, they had fallen by half to only 19 billion barrels, their lowest level since 1940. But in the 3 years since, that long decline has certainly and significantly been reversed. Reserves increased and production is up now almost 20%, mostly thanks to drilling in liquids-rich shale areas. The pace of U.S. oil development is picking up pretty quickly. For the first time since early 1990s, more drilling rigs are working on oil trends than gas trends. Some 1,200 rigs are now drilling for oil here, the most in 25 years. There's a saying in our industry, look for oil where it's already been found before. And that's what we and our industry is doing. We are going into older producing areas and finding major liquids potential in shale source rocks and other tight reservoirs in places like the Eagle Ford and North Barnett trends here in Texas, the Bakken, North Dakota, and Montana, the Granite Wash in Oklahoma and Kansas, the Leonard, Avalon, Bone Spring, Woodford, and Wolfberry in West Texas and New Mexico, the Niobrara in Colorado, Wyoming and Nebraska, the Monterey in California, and the Utica in Ohio. So look for all of these to become even more familiar names going forward. As for potential, several consulting firms estimate that tight oil production from these fields could reach 3 million barrels of oil per day by 2025. Now that's 5 times current production from these trends. Other fields may also prove productive. We don't yet have credible estimates of total tight oil potential. However, it seems reasonable that the US and Canada together have at least 100 billion barrels of recoverable resources, and perhaps far more than that. So this will greatly enhance North America energy security. And again, we don't yet know how far the tight oil revolution will ultimately lead. But at this early stage, it's certainly very exciting. Canada has both shale gas and tight oil potential. It's also home to the Alberta oil sands with 1.75 trillion barrels in place. That's the world's largest such deposit, or as much as the entire world's remaining recoverable reserves from conventional oil. The oil sands proven resources, meaning those currently recoverable economically and technically, are 170 billion barrels. That's 8 times larger than the current US reserves, and this could rise with new technology. Current production is 1.5 million barrels a day and climbing, and this oil comes to the United States. In fact, Canada is our leading supplier of imported oil. So past assumptions of oil and gas scarcity that went into business strategic plans, governmental policies, and public attitudes are out of date. The major production trends have certainly been reversed. Instead of declining US oil and gas production, are at last growing again, and Canada represents an enormous additional energy source. And the world has taken notice. Shale gas exploration, it's gone global. Assessments performed for the US Department of Energy have confirmed major resources in dozens of geologic basins around the world. It seems certain that natural gas can supply far more than 22% of the world's energy it provides today. And this has been made possible by a modern industrial success story. It's long known that shale source rock often holds a lot of oil and gas, and that extends over larger areas than our traditional drilling targets in geological traps. But we just couldn't produce it economically. Then around 10 years ago, we started combining 2 innovations, hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. These weren't new. Fracturing's been around since the 1940s, and it's been used on more than 1 million wells in the US alone, and it's been done safely and successfully. Horizontal drilling came along during the 1980s. It was by combining the 2 that achieved the breakthrough. And since then, we continually improve the process. So we at ConocoPhillips help pioneer production from shale and tight formations as well as from coal beds. We have large acreage positions, active drilling and growing production, Eagle Ford, Barnett, and Bakken trends, and we're adding a lot of acreage, significant acreage, and several others. And we also rank amongst the largest producers of Canada's oil sands. We have a major coal bed methane development project underway in Australia, and we're looking for a number of opportunities around the world. So unconventional resources is certainly going to play a major role in our future and certainly in the industry. And so are our deepwater exploration acreage in the Gulf of Mexico and conventional production in a dozen other countries around the world. I've talked a great deal about the potential of North America's unconventional resources. Now, let's look at some of the benefits that come from the development of these resources. First is enhance U.S. energy security to reduce dependence on uncertain supply sources. For natural gas, domestic delivery capacity is now more than ample thanks to new producing fields, pipelines, and storage. Wellhead prices have fallen with no near-term upward pressure on the horizon. Only 5 years ago, most in the industry thought we would need growing imports of liquefied natural gas, known as LNG. Now, instead, many import terminals are sitting idle, but they remain available if needed, which should further assure end users of supply security. In the case of oil, U.S. import dependence could fall at least by half by 2025. You heard that in just the earlier presentation. And this has enormous implications, among them less exposure to unfavorable geopolitical events, improvement in our balance of payments, and job creation in North America rather than elsewhere around the world. Further, much of our remaining import needs could be met by secure and friendly Canada, which you know is right next door. Our new energy abundance also represents a major competitive advantage. Very few countries can match our resource base, particularly our low-cost natural gas. So this can help give domestic manufacturers a competitive advantage in the fight for global business. And there are more benefits through job creation. Today, natural gas, it sustains 2.8 million U.S. jobs. In looking at the oil and gas industry's future job potential, Wood Mackenzie, they predict that creation of 500,000 new jobs by 2030. And that's under existing government policies. But with more balanced policies, we could add another 1 million jobs on top of that. And that's all done at no cost to the government. In fact, government revenue would rise by some $800 billion, which would certainly help with respect to deficit reduction. And these are big numbers. You might ask, are they really achievable? And the evidence is very encouraging. According to a study by CIRA, shale gas development supported 600,000 U.S. jobs in 2010. It contributed $77 billion to gross domestic product, and these numbers are no doubt much higher today than they were in 2010. By 2035, CIRA estimates they could reach nearly 1.7 million jobs and $231 billion in GDP. Of course, energy production in turn produces government revenues. It yields federal, state, local income taxes, severance taxes, royalties, and fees. So generating this revenue requires no government mandates, subsidies, unlike some alternative energy sources. And it typically begins in the near term, not in the distant future. There are also environmental benefits to consider, particularly with respect to natural gas. For example, it produces very little of the nitrogen, sulfur compounds, and particulates that cause acid rain and smog. When used for power generation, it produces only half the carbon dioxide of coal. It requires 1/20th of the land footprint of equivalent wind energy, and when combined cycle power plants are fueled by natural gas, they use 60% less water than coal plants of equal capacity. And they do it without producing soot or fly ash. Using natural gas to replace less clean-burning fuel is the fastest, lowest-cost way to reduce CO2 emissions and benefit the climate. Natural gas can also facilitate the greater use of renewable energy by providing backup power. Gas-fired power plants, they're very flexible. They can ramp up quickly when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. And if electric vehicles really catch on in the future, we could recharge them with gas-fired electric power, and that's done cleanly and efficiently. I mentioned earlier that changes in government policy are needed to maximize the potential of our unconventional resources. First, greater resource access. Thus far, the U.S. unconventional resource revolution, it has essentially occurred primarily on privately owned land. It was the land's availability for leasing that enabled the industry to build viable acreage positions and initiate drilling. Had this been government land, we would likely still be awaiting drilling permits or fighting lawsuits from NGOs or outright drilling bans enacted by Congress. For example, of the 1.7 billion acres of U.S. outer continental shelf lands, less than 3% is leased. Nearly all of that is confined to the central and western Gulf of Mexico. As a result of the complicated and time-consuming approach to granting access, production from federal lands fell 40% over the last 10 years. So opening more federal lands onshore could undoubtedly contribute to unconventional production. Meanwhile, opening some of the federal waters that are off limits to drilling could contribute to conventional production. Government also needs to overhaul its development permitting process for energy infrastructure. It's too easy to delay projects now. The proposed Keystone Pipeline is a classic example. Keystone would not be much different from the other oil pipelines we have developed in operation today. The oil it would carry does not differ materially in carbon intensity from some of the oil already produced or used in our downstream systems. For example, the heavy oil in California or the heavy oil from Mexico and Venezuela. Opponents, they're trying to block the pipeline in mistaken hope of stopping Canada's oil sands development. But there are compelling economic and employment incentives for Canada to continue development wherever the oil goes. In fact, the Keystone delay is forcing Canada to consider improving its oil transportation capacity to the Pacific coast, and the oil sands are very attractive to the fast-growing Asian countries. Their state oil companies and sovereign wealth funds have invested billions of dollars already in the oil sands. If America turns away, others will step forward for this oil. If that happens, the U.S. would lose not only energy security, but economic stimulation. Keystone, as you know, is a shovel-ready project. It would quickly create 20,000 high-wage U.S. manufacturing and construction jobs, as well as high-paying permanent jobs. The Keystone opponents object to the greenhouse gas emissions associated with oil sands production. But the difference, it's only 5 to 15% over other crude oil sources when you evaluate this on a full cycle basis. The oil sands, they account for only 5% of Canada's total emissions and 0.1% of the world's emissions. Research is underway to reduce emissions generated during production, then to capture and permanently store the resulting carbon dioxide. If the opponents force the oil sands output to go to Asia, they will actually create more emissions. How? That's due to the longer transportation to take the oil sands to the market. At the same time, the U.S. will have to import more oil from further away, which also increases CO2 emissions. The opponents further object to the impact of surface mining. But we need to recognize that 82% of the oil sands are suitable only for in situ production, not mining operations. And we're looking to shrink the size of surface facilities, reduce water use and energy use, improve wildlife production, and accelerate land reclamation. The Keystone delay also poses serious energy security issues for the Gulf Coast area refineries, which were built to consume and operate on heavy oil. They now process quite a bit of oil from Mexico and Venezuela. Thousands of U.S. refining jobs depend on that supply, but heavy oil production in both countries is not increasing, it's on the decline, and some of Venezuela's oil is being diverted elsewhere for political purposes. Canada's oil sands are an ideal replacement. Otherwise, imports will have to come from more distant places and possibly unfriendly sources, if the heavy oil is even attainable. And finally, we acknowledge the need for legitimate government regulation, certainly in our industry. Such measures to protect the environment and certainly to ensure safety. But regulations, they need to be reasonable and smart. They should be enacted thoughtfully after their economic and consumer impacts have been assessed and have been considered. And new regulations should not duplicate the thousands of federal and state requirements that are already on the books, nor should they create conflicting requirements for oversight responsibilities. Government also should have realistic tax policies. For example, the U.S. energy industry faces threats of tax increases that target us alone. This despite the fact that our effective global tax rate far exceeds those of other industries. We support any even-handed, level playing field to overhaul our tax systems. But government should not single out industries for punitive tax increases. This would reduce industry investment, impact our ability to develop production needed to meet future energy demand. It would also do so by reducing cash flow and making projects less economic or maybe even uneconomic. Federal tax policy must not destroy our ability to compete against foreign and government-controlled companies. Further, government energy policies must be fuel neutral and avoid picking the technology winners. Many states have already enacted standards for renewable or clean energy. These require utilities to use certain levels of renewable energy. In California's case, for example, to supply 30% of its power from renewable sources. Federal standards have also been proposed, but renewable sources, they are more expensive than natural gas, so they do drive up consumer cost. The mandated use of wind and solar power also displaces natural gas. Remember, natural gas is a very clean source of fuel. Government should not pick the technology winners. Instead, it should set a performance target, such as for reduced emissions. And then it should let the market determine the best way to accomplish this objective. In closing, the industry has a great deal of work in front of it to enable North America to fully capture its unconventional energy potential. We must continue being a source of technological innovation. We must continue finding ways to improve resource recovery, enhance efficiency, reduce costs. We must meet ever higher environmental standards, and we certainly must operate safely. And finally, we must educate the public and policymakers about our production processes and safeguards. Our industry is admittedly very, very complex. It's hard to understand for outsiders. So we must do far more to demystify what we do. In short, we have to do a much, much better way of telling our story. Thank you very much for listening to my comments this morning. Susan said we have a little bit of time for taking some questions if some in the audience have them. If they don't, we'll just move on with the agenda. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Our next speaker is Dr. Juan Jose Suarez-Coppel. He is the Director General of Pemex. And during his career, Dr. Suarez-Coppel has held different positions in both the public and private sector. He served as Chief Advisor to the Ministry of Finance, as well as being Chief Financial Officer at Pemex. He has also served as Vice President of Finance at Grupo Modelo and as the Adjunct Director of Derivatives for Banamex. Dr. Suarez-Coppel has a bachelor's degree in economics from ITAM in Mexico, as well as a PhD from the University of Chicago. He has lectured in economics at ITAM, as well as the University in Barcelona and Brown University here in the U.S. Please welcome Dr. Suarez-Coppel.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, first of all, thanks for the people organizing the summit for inviting us. It's a great opportunity. Unfortunately, a lot of the time that a lot of the people talking about the Mexican industry and or Pemex is not Pemex, so we take this opportunity and to give our views. No? Let's see. There we go. So I'm going to be talking a lot about future estimates. These are our best estimates, no? But we have bonds out there in the market. Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk very quickly a little bit about background, very briefly, a couple of slides about history of the oil industry in Pemex production in Mexico. Then what have been happening in the last few years, what do we intend to do, and where will that take us to in terms of oil and gas production. Well, this is the story in the slide. As you remember, Mexico was producing in the late 20s, maximum production was something like 280,000 barrels a day. That was, we were the second producer in the world, and then that started declining, revolution, the Mexican Revolution, the nationalization, and so on. And by the 60s, we were back to around 250,000 barrels. Those were basically tertiary sands a lot in Tamaulipas, in Tampico-Misantlan Basin, and some Tabasco, but also tertiary sands. That brought us up to at the early 70s to something around 450, 480. Then in the early 70s, we found the fields, the reservoirs, the carbonate reservoirs in the Mesozoic in Tabasco. Big finds. That allow us to increase production up to almost 1.5, but look what happened with the blue line. We start putting our eggs in the new fields and let decline production, all the way to around 100,000 in the tertiary sands in Tampico-Misantla, what was the Faja de Oro and so on, well, also the carbonates in the Faja de Oro. Then in the very early 80s, we found the offshore fields, Cantarell, Chuk, some other fields there. So another big find. That allowed us to increase production briefly to 3 million, and then again to 3 million, about 3.2, 3.3 in the early 2000s. Look what happened to the Mesozoic in Chiapas. It went down all the way to, well, you can see there in the early 2000s. So this is what we call in Pemex the beaten apples. What happened is every time we found a new field, we move there and we stop investing in the old ones. It's not economics, it's not technology, it's not the resource that can be recovered. It's just the Pemex has been run as a government agency. There's somebody somewhere without much knowledge of what's what happened underground, and that decides the allocation of the budget. Mm-hmm. So look also what happened with Cantarell. When Cantarell reached its peaks, the other ones were very much reaching its zenith. So it was, again, that's a reflection of what happened. And what has happened in the last few years, it's very important, we stabilized production at around 2.55 million barrels of crude a day, but that was because of the increase in the other fields. Mm-hmm. This is the potential in Mexico. A lot of the time we hear that Mexico is running out of oil. What these graphs show us, and these are certified numbers by third parties, it's that there's a lot of resource there. And that's a consequence of what I was talking about before. What you can see, it's in terms of recoverable resources, the largest amount is in the southeastern. That's Tabasco and the offshore in front of Tabasco and Campeche. Cantarell, and then the onshore in Tabasco and Kumalopsap and stuff like that. And also what you can see there is that there's a lot of potential between moving the 3Ps to the 1P. What I hope to show you in the presentation is that these 3 these 3P numbers are, if at all, very conservative in terms of assumed recoverable ratios. The other thing is there's also a lot of potential of moving from 3P to 1P in Chicontepec. That's the main field in terms of those numbers in Tampico-Misantla. And in terms of prospective resources, the main resource is deep waters in the Gulf of Mexico, but also in the southeastern. And also, the other thing is we have, there's this number brought around about 10 years reserve life. We produce between 1.35 billion barrels of oil equivalent to 1.4 billion barrels of oil equivalent per year. So we have 10 years, it's a 1P. But you look at the 3P, it's 30 years. And you look at the prospective resources, it's as much. Now, what has happened in the last few years? In the last few years, the lower number over there, it's the investment in exploration in pesos, but pesos in 2011 prices, so that's around 11 pesos per dollar. What you see there, it's, first you can, there are 3 lines. The top one is production, the other one is recover resources from exploration success, and the other one is 1P replacement. So when you see there an upward trend, and of course, given that we're beginning from a standing machine, there's a lag between the recovered resources from exploration and the 1P. But those lines start getting together. We hope to announce in the next few weeks the numbers for 2011, and we expect them to be very good news. But the point is, the last 3 years we have been having the exploration success has been allowing us to replace more than 100%, and we have this increase over time of the 1P. The other number that I want you guys to look at is the lower row. That's investment in exploration. You can see in the early 90s, before the collapse in price, we were investing close to $1 billion. For 2 years, we invest close to $1 billion in exploration. The rest of the time, before and after, we were investing something in the order of $500 million. For the resources that we're talking about before, that's peanuts, that's backyard exploration. And it was not until 2002 and 2003 where we were able to do some tricks with the federal budget that we were able to start investing in exploration again. And as we were able to maintain that investment in exploration, is that those numbers start moving. These are the main discoveries in the last 5 years. So what I want to point here is we have here 4 types of discoveries. One, the 2 on top, Simin and Shush, that's shallow waters in front of Tabasco. We're talking about 30 meters to 50 meters. If these fields had been found in the US Gulf of Mexico, they would have been the largest field discovery in the period. These are shallow waters next to our infrastructure. The other ones are the darker blue. That's heavy oil, in offshore. That's a continuation of, we have Cantarell with 21 degrees API. Then we have Kumalop-Sap that goes all the way from 21 to up to 11, and that trend continues. That trend also it's challenging because of the heavy oil, but the resources are huge. So you can see that Ayatzil, Pit, Cayab, Tequel, Utzil, they're all in the same trend. And that also brings us to several billions of recoverable resources. The other are the gas fields. All of those, Lacache, Lalail, well, not Pareto, but Piclis, those are in deep water. They are up to between 1.3 and 1.5 kilometers, water depth. We are beginning the development of those fields. I'm going to talk about it later, but that's a deep water. That has been the main findings that we have had so far in deep water. And the other ones are Terra, Pareto, Bricol, with the 300 million recoverable. Those are onshore in Tabasco. As we get new technology, new technology allows us to see more. And there's still a lot of resources there. So we have been finding in these years, very sizable discoveries in shallow water and in inland. So this brings us back to what the hell happened in the last few years then with Pemex. How come you guys were investing and production fell the way it fell? Well, it's very useful, we believe, to differentiate between Cantarell and the rest. So I have 3 lines there. The one that says actual is what happened to Cantarell. The one that says forecast, it was meant to happen to Cantarell. That's the project that was approved by the board in Pemex and by the Ministry of Hacienda for the budgetary, for budget in 1997. So the point is, Cantarell was a project that was supposed to bring forward production and have decline rates, not as steep as what happened, and with a higher tail at the end, but it was meant to be pretty much that way. No, as you can see there, the difference of the production over all these years is 6%. The other thing that happened is that as Cantarell started declining, the other fields were start getting developed, to be developed. No? A lot of these other fields that we haven't developed before. And that has been growing at 9% per year. If you just calculate, you look at the increase in production, that's around 750,000 barrels from 2005 to date. And that would have been the biggest increase in production of any country in the world, and that's for that period. So these are the 2 very different stories behind what happened to total production. But we believe it's very important to understand what was behind. No? So what are we doing? Obviously, no, our strategies, our main initiatives so far, or right now, are in terms of exploration. No? We have to continue with new technology, going for all those low-hanging apples in shallow waters, and in low-hanging apples, quote unquote. Litoral de Tabasco is very deep wells, high pressure, high temperature. But things we haven't gone to before. And also the other ones, as I said before, is heavy crude. Then there's Deepwater. The other one is shale gas and shale oil potential. And in terms of production is the development of Chicontepec. Talked about before, in terms of all that potential there. It's a very tight oil, very small buckets distributed, and that's around. Then to reactivate all those mature fields, all those beaten apples, to reduce decline rates. We have a lot of mature fields, so we have to make sure that we're using best-in-kind field administration and enhanced recovery, and also, well, enhanced recovery over there, and the heavy oil needs that we have. Quick explanation of how we have given the constitution in Mexico, we have to use strategically, or given all the legal restrictions, we have to use strategically our different type of contracts. So we have the usual contracts in which we go and hire drilling or some services. There, the changes in the laws in 2008 allow us a lot of flexibility so that we can pay for performance and not just go and bid for the lowest bid, and not in a full cost way. Then we have what we have called the field laboratories, in which we got together with somebody else in a given field or a given block, and together we try different ideas and different concepts together. No? There's a joint Pemex and the whatever contractor or operator we're working with team, and we try all these different concepts. No? And the third ones are the performance contracts that allow us, that the change in law in 2008 allow us to do. And here what we do is we pay to recover a given fraction of cost, not 100%, because we're very worried about, we want to avoid gold plating, of course, and a fee per barrel produced. So the fee has to include the estimate for our cost recovery, and the way we look at it is we don't want to have just a fixed fee per barrel, because we don't want to be, if there's a underestimate of how much it's going to cost, we don't want to have a failed project. We don't want to have just full recovery or cost plus, because also there's a given, because two things. First, what I said before, gold plating, and second, we want to participate in what we see as a very steep cost curve that should happen as these fields are recovered, are developed. Again, our feeling is that a lot of these fields are resource plays and will have a very steep cost behavior. So we tried this concept first with Chicontepec. With Chicontepec, we started 2 years ago with the field laboratories. So we assigned given blocks to joint teams of those guys and us in the different fields. What had happened, it's underneath. What you see there is production in the last few years. So we were stuck for a while in the 20 and then in the 30,000 barrels. We start seeing, getting ideas, not only applying the field laboratories, but also us applying those ideas or results in the field laboratories, but applying the ideas that were proving successful in the field laboratories. We start seeing that increase in production first in 1 year from the 30 to the 45 or so, and then right now from those 45 to around 65,000 barrels. You can see also how the decline rate here was in the order of 10–15% per month. Again, these are tight, very tight oil. What we have now is that with the new practices in the field, we have been able to pretty much, well, not only slow down, but in some cases, just kill decline rates. So this increase is not just more completions. This increase is with fewer wells. We're also trying, of course, multifracting and deviate or some horizontal wells, and also CO2 injection and gas injection tests. So what we're doing in terms of mature fields, we're working. We went through the first round for mature field, these incentive contracts in the southern region. The winners are over there. It's Lumberjay and Petrofac, with a bid of $5 per barrel with 2 fields, and then $9.40 for the other field. This other field is smaller, and it's right smack in the middle of a urban area, so it's bound to be more expensive. Here you can also see what is the volume in place in those fields. So it's almost 1.2 billion barrels. Again, these fields were developed. Some of these are tertiary, so they were like with technology in the 50s and 60s, some in the 70s. They were pretty much abandoned. You can see that they were producing overall 13,000 barrels a day. Or the fields producing, one was not producing. And you can also see what is our 3P number there. So you can compare those 200 million barrels of recoverable estimated with the 1.2. So that's what I meant by those 3P numbers are very low, are very conservative, and what we expect is with new technology, with new ideas, we can recover much more than even the 3P. The next round, it's in the northern region. We already issued the basis, the convocatoria, the terms, and we hope to complete that during the first part of the year. These fields, there are 6 fields. Volume in place is almost 14 billion. A lot of that you can see there, almost 10. It's Panuco, it's very heavy oil. But again, Panuco we developed literally some of those in 1900. Total reserves are 224, again, what I was talking about. And production it's 12,000. After that, we hope to do some Chicontepec, now that we have a better understanding and better And so we feel that uncertainty of how to develop and the future cost of Chicontepec are within a reasonable cone. And if time allows, given political times in Mexico, we could start trying these with with important variants for Deepwater. No? And that important variance, of course, will be as absorbing a lot of exploration risks that hasn't been present in these other mature fields. These are secondary recoveries and enhanced secondary and enhanced recovery. No? Those are the pilots we're doing right now, or planning to do. And there you have the potential of what we estimate to recuperate. No? So you can see, for example, enhanced oil recovery, if we increase it into a range of 3 to 8% in the fields where we feel that is applicable, that will mean between 6 and 16 billion barrels. You have the low permeability is Chicontepec. Secondary recovery, it's 4 to 9 billion, and so on. The strategy for shallow water and onshore, I'll be briefer. No, those are the main areas. That's the oil that we expect, and those are the resources. No, location is where we already set the location, whether it's approved for investing internally or not. That's the difference between location opportunity and place. We still don't have location, but that's estimate of the resource there. Deepwater, we have invested in the last, from 2002 that we actually started investing in Deepwater, 2011, we have invested 3.6 billion. We have acquired 3D seismic. We do it by ourselves, obviously, for obvious reasons, 90,000 square kilometers. We have drilled 18 wells. 10 were producers and 8 were commercial. As I said before, the majority of that is natural gas, non-associated with liquids or not, depending on the different fields. And the 3P there, so far it's around 800 million. As I said before, the majority of that, it's gas potential. We estimate there a gas play in the area that says Cuna there, of something between 5 and 15 TCF. These are the story of how much of our drilling in deep water. No, we began in 2002, as I said before, 500 meters. In 2011, we drilled 5 wells. 2011, we were the second busiest company in the world in terms of drilling in deep water after Petrobras. And we plan to do 6 wells for 2012. You can also see how gradually we have been increasing the depth. No, we're drilling right now to 2,000 meters underwater. We're gonna be drilling. 2 of those are in the Perdido area. No, we have them slotted for this year. The other one, Trion, it's a little bit it's subsalt, a little bit to the west of Perdido, and the other ones are in front of the Tamaulipas. These are the number of wells we drill in deep waters, no, over 500 meters. No, as I said before, we were the second busiest last year. In the last 5 years, we were the 6th busiest in the world. So usually people, when you look from the outside, or like there's this vision in Mexico and outside that we're waiting for the Virgin of Guadalupe, no, to come and help us get oil there. Of course, that even geologists with their optimists are not expecting for that in Mexico. Shale, no, you all read the potential that the EAA, I always miss my vowel, sorry, of 680 TCFs. We estimate between 150 to 460. No? That's so even at that range, it's several times our conventional gas potential. With the resources we estimate, we could we already drilled the first successful well. No, it's horizontal multifracting near the border, Emergente. Those are the main plays that we have. No, they are part of Eagle Ford. There's wet gas there, and equivalent of Haynes and I'm not talking here, no, of course, as it gets wetter, no, there's a point in which that, no, what's tight oil and what's shale gas, but I haven't mentioned in the 3P numbers and so on, we haven't mentioned shale oil, no, there's significant resources of shale. We're estimating of shale oil in Mexico, no, the Pimienta Shale and some others, and we're working on estimating those numbers, and they're not here. With this potential, no, a development, a regular or a expected development will allow us to increase by 3 our 6 BCFs that we're producing right now a day. Mm-hmm. So the logic will be what I talked about before in terms of ATG and mature fields will be first we're investing in understanding the geology, understanding where it's wet, understanding what works, you know, what are the concepts. We will expect to follow with field laboratories and then with our development and incentive contracts and service contracts, performance contracts. Over time, of course, we will expect this to happen until, or to have sizable production until the second half of next sexennium. No? Those are our estimates, and that's the nature of the industry. It might not be sexy, but you have to get it done. I talk about the developments, the finds, no, that we had in shallow waters in the last few years. They will bring us, for example, not just the extra heavy and the extra light and condensates, and will produce we expect a production to peak in 2015, 16, 17, start producing in 2012 of 200,000 barrels, and 1 BCF, no, between Simin, Shush, and Ingas. So with all this, what's the future scenario? No? With all this, we will expect to reach the 2.7 million, no, at the beginning of next sexennium, 2013-14. We will expect to reach the 3 million by the end of next sexennium, 2017-18. And this is, of course, then, no, as you can see, it doesn't assume Deepwater until much later than that. Mm-hmm. For that, we need about, just for E&P, around $23 billion. That's, as I said before, we're producing 1.35, 1.4 billion barrels of oil equivalent. Our estimate development, finding and development moving forward is in the order of $16, $17. No? And so you multiply one by the other, and there's no magic there. No? I mean, people might complain about the cost, but these are very, very profitable projects. Profitable projects bring their own resources, unless you are, no, in a budgetary game in which the logic is not whether the investment is going to be very profitable, but how to make the numbers look as needed. So with that, that's it. Questions? Yeah, if there's any questions, any? No? It's a standing mic.
Hello?
Yes? Mm-hmm.
Juan Carlos, buenos dias. Nice to see you here at Rice. I remember, 10 years ago when Raul Munoz Leos gave a talk here. Can you tell us two things? What does a transactional service contract mean? And more importantly, with regard to your marine, your plans for Perdido, Pemex, I understood, has not negotiated for a marine containment corporation to be a member of that consortium to contain a possible oil spill. But I understand that negotiations are still going on with another marine containment consortium. Can you give us an idea as to how prepared Pemex is going to be for a possible Macondo scene in Perdido, and who will be the people that will man the rigs? In other words, Pemex has these big rigs that are perfectly capable of drilling those depths, but who's going to man the rigs in terms of the expertise to handle it? Thank you.
Sure. Transaction service is just hiring for a given activity, as I said, is drilling, the rest of services, mud services, and so on. So it's just activity by activity. In terms, we are negotiating. Well, we have a couple of alternatives. With the containment company, we're negotiating with another company that will give us access to that. We're also negotiating with Helix, and there's regulation. We are in the discussion with the regulator in Mexico, and what. We expect to have, there's a given timeline of when those containment services have to be available. We need the containment service to do the drilling. There is a phasing period for that, and this assumes that phasing period. Who's going to be drilling is going to be the same guys that have been drilling our 2,000 water depth wells. So these are different companies. We ask those companies to have a given number of years of experience, and we go and approve guy by guy. These are the guys, again, that has been drilling in the last few years. And so we're confident that we have the expertise there. And as I said before, we started with going to Deepwater in 2004. We have around 150 people in Pemex that have been working either with agreements with other oil companies, and also that have gone and do either masters or PhDs in Deepwater. So we have been. This is a product of, or this is a result of our developing the human resource first and foremost, and then getting the practice and the technology from other companies. Yeah.
Dr. Suarez Capel, thank you for your presentation. The tremendous gas reserves that you describe and the deep water discoveries that Pemex has made, plus anticipated shale gas development, what is your projection for marketing this production? Can Mexico consume what portion of the anticipated new production? Do you anticipate LNG plants or what?
Yes. For the eventual reaching the number, the potential that I talk about there, it's, well, first of all, right now we're importing about 1 BCF a day from the US. So the rest is, it will mean there are two things. We are, if I'm not wrong, we're probably 1 or 2nd in terms of LPG consumption per capita in the world. So we will expect to be a substitute of natural gas for LPG, which of course will be much more efficient and will be also much friendly to global warming issues. And the other one, we will expect to have a very important development of petrochemical industry in Mexico. We see, we are planning on our petrochemical arm to be part of that development, but it will certainly, that will give us an opportunity, an important opportunity there, with potential export of petrochemicals, and also, as you said before, eventually we will need to reverse from a LNG importer to exporter, But again, that's about 6-7 years from now.
Thank you.
Given budget resources.
Thank you very much. Our final speaker, and then we'll run a little late into the coffee break, is James Carter, who served for more than 27 years at Syncrude Canada, including 10 as president and 18 as chief operating officer, so another long-time position. He also serves as corporate director for the Climate Change and Emission Management Corporation. He's on the board, several boards in Canada, and is a director and past chair of the Mining Association of Canada, where he championed development of the Towards Sustainable Mining Initiative. He is the recipient of 3 honorary doctorates in Canada, was named the Resource Person of the Year by the Alberta Chamber of Resources, and inducted as a Fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. James Carter holds a BS in Mining Engineering and is a graduate of the Advanced Management Program at Harvard Business School.
It's a real pleasure to be here in Houston again, and as I was driving to the airport in Edmonton yesterday, it was 34 degrees below zero on my temperature gauge on my vehicle, and so it was a real pleasure experiencing that 100-degree Delta T when I arrived here. Thank you for that warm welcome, Susan, and I felt welcomed earlier on today when John Deutsch made reference to the fact that Canadians might actually be easier to do business with than Californians. And then I quickly went to, perhaps it's not good to think of yourself as the best-looking horse in the glue factory, and then quickly moved on from there, as I'll do now. The opportunity to talk about the oil sands is really great, and it's a pleasure to be here to do that. But I also want to cover some technologies that we're investing in Alberta to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well. Just want to make sure I've got the... Yeah, there we go. Okay. Let's move right into world energy demand. And I should just say, by the way, as I progress on to this whole topic, that James Mulva has covered quite a few of the points on the oil sands here, so I'll reinforce some of his comments as we go. When you look at global energy demand, this chart here really manifests how much we think we're going to see in terms of growth in BTUs as we go forward. The world population is now at 7 billion as of October of last year. A recent article in The Economist suggested that the people are already here on Earth that are going to create the next billion, so probably 8 is something we're going to get to. There might be a debate over whether we get to 9, but 9 billion people. But as we do, the demand for hydrocarbon energy energy of all sorts is going to continue. And indeed, as countries that don't have access to forms of energy try to increase their lifestyle as well. So that's going to happen. If you looked at world oil reserves, Canada ranks 3rd in terms of crude oil reserves in the world, 175 billion barrels, 170 billion of which is in the Athabasca oil sands. And because of research and development, we now can include that in true reserves. It wasn't always the case, and really just happened back in about 2006. 2005, 2006. An important point is, though, that only 21% of the world's available proven crude oil reserves are accessible to private sector investment. In other words, they're not state-controlled. And 53% of the world's open and accessible reserves are in Alberta's oil sands. So it is a pretty significant play when you think of it in those terms. This has been mentioned earlier on, but the sources of U.S. oil imports to Canada are shown on this chart. The U.S. consumes a little over 19 million barrels a day these days, produces about 10 million, so a little over 9 million is imported. Canada is the largest supplier of crude oil to the United States. We supply about 23% of your imports. And we know that the U.S. is looking for energy that is adequate, reliable, affordable, and cleaner, which in turn is fundamental really to economic, environmental, and social well-being. Canada and its provinces are free and democratic societies that respect individual and property rights. We provide our citizens with sound and representative government and support the efforts to build a better life. And we think the same cannot always be said about many of the other world's exporting countries, oil exporting countries. Oil sand development and the U.S. economy is something that's linked very closely. Energy is a major part of trade for Canada and the U.S. And in 2010, with energy products such as oil, natural gas, and electricity, it had amounted to $103 billion worth of trade between the two countries. And when you buy a barrel of oil from the oil sands, you get the multiplier effect of a lot of things happening in the United States. There are 49 states in the U.S. that actually provide goods and services to the oil and gas industry in Canada. And when I think of some of the major ones, I think about the you know, the mobile equipment that's used in the surface mining of the oil sands. Caterpillar, for example, in Illinois, Bucyrus, Erie, and Milwaukee, P&H. We've got Georgia Iron Works that make pumps for us in Georgia. So between $8 and $15 billion a year will actually be directly flowing into the U.S. economy as a result of our development plans as we go forward. It's pretty significant. I wanted to cover off on some other forms of energy that we also have in Canada, and that's the offshore. We have a fairly significant offshore program there. We now have 4 producing projects. We've got Hibernia, Terra Nova, White Rose, and the North Amethyst. And currently we're producing about 270,000 barrels a day of crude oil from our offshore. And that's about 35% of Canada's conventional light crude and 10% of Canada's total crude oil production. So it's really a presence that can't be ignored. We also have one producing natural gas field called the Sable that came into production in 1999. And we have the Deep Panyuk that will go into production later on this year. This question gets asked a lot. What are the oil sands? Well, the oil sands are really a naturally occurring mixture of sand, clay, and water, and bitumen, which is really a very heavy oil. And production of the oil sands began in the late 1960s after years of research and development. In fact, there have been 2 basic challenges, though, associated with conquering the resource over the last 100 years or so. And the first was really solving the riddle of how to separate the oil from the sand. And after we figured out how to do that, the next was figuring out how to do it economically, particularly when you consider that conventional oil is easier and cheaper to access. Now, through the years, two viable processes have emerged. One of them, the most recent one, being in situ, where producers drill wells and inject the steam into the reservoir and liquefy the oil, and then pump it to the surface. About 80% of the oil sands will be accessed by in situ production. The earlier production method was surface mining, and in that particular process, you actually mine the ore body, or the sand itself, containing the bitumen, and then process it to remove the bitumen. And about 60% of the production in the oil sands comes from surface mining today, and about 40% from in situ. As we go forward, that will change again, leaning more in the direction of in situ. Recoveries on the in situ side are about 35 to 40%, whereas in surface mining, about 92% of the resource is actually extracted and recovered. This map just shows you northern Alberta, where the oil sands are located. There are 2 locations. One of them is the Athabasca oil sands, and that's where the surface mining and a lot of the in situ occurs, around Fort McMurray. The difference between that and the stuff over on the left side in Peace River is that the oil sand in the Athabasca oil sands, the sand itself is water wet first, and then it has the oil attached. In other words, the sand was wet with water and then the oil attached to it, whereas in the Peace River, it's oil wet, and it means that the extraction process is a bit more complicated there. The oil sands are located below the surface of about 142,000 square kilometers of land. And mineable oil sands only exists under 0.1% of this land, which is Canada's total boreal forest. And while disturbance is occurring daily, in more than 40 years, we've only disturbed 0.02% of the boreal forest, about 715 square kilometers. And since then, about 15% of that has been reclaimed and turned back into land that's more productive than it was, when we discovered it. So the land disturbance is really quite small relative to the entire surface area that we're talking about. Just moving on a little bit and talking about the technology, the top part of the chart shows mining, and 20%, as I said earlier, is recovered using surface mining. There's been a big shift in the technology. In the early days, we used huge drag lines that are similar to what's used in coal strip mining, and we used bucket wheels and conveyors. We actually mined the oil sands and then transported it into a building where we introduced it with steam in huge tumblers like big cement retorts. And we actually had to operate those processes at about 80 degrees Celsius to get the oil to separate from the water. We had major breakthroughs due to our investment in R&D over the early 90s, to the point where huge trucks and shovels are now used. We crush the oil sand and we actually mix it with water in the field and pump it into the plant where we separate the sand from the oil. And in the process of the transportation phase, the oil actually frees itself from the sand. So it's been a real enabler to reducing the amount of energy that we need to have to get a barrel of oil out of the oil sands. The in situ is shown on the bottom part of the chart. You can see there the wells are drilled in. The top well is actually steam injection, the top part of the horizontal well, and it causes the bitumen to flow to the lower well, and then it's pumped to the surface. All aspects of the oil sands are very heavily regulated. A comprehensive federal and provincial regulatory framework governs oil and gas development in Canada. The Energy Resources Conservation Board ensures that the resource is extracted in the most effective way. And the foundation for this regulatory system is based really on three pieces of legislation. One of them is the Environmental Protection and Enhancement Act, which really regulates the facilities to ensure there's no adverse impact to the environment and to make sure that operators are operating within the guidelines of their permit. The Water Act, which is, as its name alludes, regulates the use of water. And then more recently we have the Climate Change and Emissions Management Act, which is the newest piece of legislation, which allows the government to set emissions targets and to set up for a carbon credit system. But let me just talk a little bit about each point on the chart without belaboring it too much. But regional air quality is monitored. We have a very comprehensive air monitoring system in Fort McMurray, 22 locations. It's monitored real time, 24 hours a day. People can call in if they have any concerns about odors, et cetera, and it's followed up on. Studies that we've done with air quality in comparison to major cities in Canada indicate that the air quality in and around Fort McMurray is better than any of the major cities in Canada, and indeed better than some of the rural cities in non-industrial parts of Alberta. Water intake is another important issue. You hear a lot about how much water the oil sands use. The water is actually recycled. 85% of the water in surface mining is recycled. 90% of the water in situ is recycled. And the water is actually reused 19 times. The intake from the Athabasca River is less than 1% of the mean annual flow. And with all the projects developed, it'll be less than 2%. And indeed, the Athabasca River is only 12% allocated, which is very low by comparison with other rivers in Alberta. North Saskatchewan, for example, that flows through Edmonton, is 26% allocated because of all the municipalities along the way. The same with the Bow River in Calgary. So there's a lot of myths out there about water. Land reclamation has been going on since mining started. And in fact, Syncrude had its first bison herd over 20 years ago now, and raised 300 bison on the reclaimed land in the Syncrude operation. So it's an ongoing activity. Rest assured that the monitoring of the industry in Alberta is well under control by both levels of government. I wanted to talk a little bit about oil sands greenhouse gases in Alberta, but I think I've jumped a slide somewhere. Here's the one. There was reference made to this earlier on about the carbon footprint of a barrel of oil from the oil sands. And as Mr. Mulva pointed out, it's currently comparable to conventional crude oils processed in the US. If you measured greenhouse gas emissions from the start of a product's life cycle through to its end use, this is called a life cycle or well-to-wheels analysis. And that's what's been done with these various crudes that you see on the chart. And as you can see, the well-to-wheels would indicate that the Canadian oil sands average, which is the very right-hand bar in the chart, is very much in line with other available crude oils. It's lower than others, and particularly California, as you can see on that chart, and ties with Nigeria. So it's about 6% more than the average slate of crude oil imported into the U.S. But those that oppose oil sand development, if you ask the question, well, what do you replace it with? If you're going to replace it with Venezuelan crude or crude from Nigeria, you're going to have the same, carbon impact as happens with the oil sands. And by the way, this number has gone down. It came down from about 15% a few years ago to 10, and now down to 6. For two reasons. One of them is that we're reducing the amount of energy it takes to make a barrel in the oil sands dramatically. And second, the slate of crude oil available around the world is getting heavier because the easier stuff has been exploited. And so those two factors actually make that change. Greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, a lot talked about there. Canada contributes about 2% of the world's CO2 emissions. The oil sands, and Jim, we've just recently updated our numbers, are about 6.5% of Canada's 2%. They were at 5%, as you had mentioned. And the oil sand producers have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions per barrel by 29% since 1990, so it's been a big reduction. And I guess that's about all I would say about that. The one, if you looked at it in terms of total volume of CO2 produced, the oil sands produce about 40 million tons a year of CO2. If you compare that with the coal-fired electricity industry in the United States, it produces almost 2 billion tons of CO2 a year. So 40 billion versus 2 billion. Sometimes we scratch our heads and wonder why the oil sands are made the poster boy for everything that's wrong with global warming when we think about those numbers. Increasing energy efficiency in the extraction process has really contributed to doing this. We used to have a process that was 80 degrees Celsius at one time. With the hydro transport, that's transporting the oil sand through pipelines, we were able to bring the temperature down because we got digestion in the pipeline and the transportation phase. We were able to bring it down to 50 degrees and then eventually down to 40 degrees Celsius. So that's what really contributed to the 29% reduction in CO2 emissions. Billions of dollars have been invested. The oil sands are all about research and development and technology. And we are proud of this as Canadians. This is a Canadian success story. We did not give up on this in the early 80s when crude oil prices dropped. We continued on and turned it into what's become really the economic locomotive, not only for Alberta, but for all of Canada. And the whole front end of this process is a Canadian story. It's traditional mining, but it's modified to reflect the challenges of the oil sands. Oil sand developers spent over $500 million on research and development as recently as 2007. I don't have numbers that are, recent numbers on that, but it's about the same amount. And indeed, there's a lot more work going on today on collaborating on tailings ponds and that sort of thing. The same can be said also for in situ, although it's younger and it's newer in terms of development, but a lot of good effort is going on there to improve the recovery methodologies. We have the toe-to-heel method, which is really actually burning bitumen in the drill hole to create the heat, and not using nearly as much energy as a result of doing that. Solvent recovery is another way. We're adding solvents to the steam to help extract the bitumen. And electrothermal dynamic stripping is another one. And the industry is also looking at geothermal as a source of energy as well to help facilitate the extraction processes. I want to talk quickly about Alberta's efforts as a province to reduce CO2 emissions. The government of Alberta recognized the need to invest in technology to do this, and the climate strategy of 2002 led to the creation of what's called the Climate Change and Emissions Management Act. And under that act, Alberta became the first jurisdiction in North America to regulate large industrial GHG emissions and actually placed a value on carbon. And that value was $15 a ton. The major emitters, and that was anybody over 100,000 tons per year of CO2, were asked to reduce their emissions by 12%. And they had three compliance options. One of them was to improve energy efficiency. The other one was to purchase accredited Alberta offsets. And then the third one was to pay into the Climate Change Emissions Management Fund. And I should say that 100% of that fund actually gets redirected back to supporting development of technology that will enhance reducing CO2 emissions. So far, the fund has collected $257 million all told, and $126 million of that has now been allocated to the projects that I show you on this particular chart. We're getting tremendous leverage out of that, about 4 to 1. So of the $126 million allocated, $632 million in project value has been created. The emissions reductions are estimated to be about 8 million tons over 10 years. You might say, well, that's not a lot, but you have to remember that these are all projects that, without that kind of support, would not get traction and not get an opportunity to be developed. I just wanted to show you quickly this next chart that shows where the funds have really gone. Energy efficiency is part of it, but and greening fossil fuels is a small part, but renewables are a big part. 57% of the value from the fund has gone to doing that. Now, there are other jurisdictions in Canada that have applied a carbon tax. British Columbia is one, but essentially that tax gets collected and it goes into general revenues and ends up, fixing potholes or whatever, becomes the important item of the day politically. In Alberta, we're directing all of those funds to projects that can help to reduce CO2 emissions. So, Alberta has also invested heavily, and by the way, I sit on the board of the Climate Change Emissions Management Corp. I also chaired the Alberta Carbon Storage and Development Council, which was really to look at how we could advance the cause of carbon capture and storage. Alberta committed $2 billion to doing this. That's a huge amount of money for a province with 3.5 million people. And we've now chosen 4 projects that are moving ahead. They're listed here. One of them is the Quest project. That's an oil sand one, and it's with Shell, Chevron, and Marathon. And we'll actually take the CO2 from the back end of their steam methane reformers, or hydrogen plants, and compress it and put it into saline aquifers that are located about 85 kilometers from there, and store it underground. The Alberta Carbon Trunk Line project is one that will enable CO2 to be captured from industrial processes and then used for enhanced oil recovery. And the Swan Hills Synfuels one is a in situ coal gasification project. These projects are all going to move forward, and there's a lot of work going on them right now. And the target is to be capturing 5 million tons starting in 2015. In the long term, we see about 70% of our CO2 emissions reduction targets in Alberta being met by carbon capture and storage. So it's a pretty important development for us. And even though one could say that the profile of some of this has kind of gone off the radar screen, Alberta hasn't given up at all on this. We've kept going because we know that we need to really develop this kind of technology and understand it by the time it's really necessary to implement it. I want to talk quickly about shale gas in Alberta. Lots have been said about that today. Alberta has approximately 850 trillion cubic feet of shale gas in place. The Alberta Geological Survey has identified about 15 prospective shale formations. And it's really considered an unconventional source, as we know, and it requires high-pressure fracking. Still in the early stages in Alberta, and the ERCB are currently evaluating the resource potential of all shale formations in Alberta. But I should say that, we've been successfully using fracking on the conventional oil side, as Mr. Mova pointed out, for a long time, but stepped up the efforts recently with horizontal drilling. And indeed, what's happened is the conventional crude oil production in Alberta in 2010 and 2011, for the first time in several years, has actually stopped declining because of our ability to go into old reserves and old reservoirs rather, and increase the production. For the previous 5 years prior to that, it was reducing at about 4.5% per year. And of course the U.S. is having similar success in the Bakken area of North Dakota and other places. So that is an opportunity, and again it points to technology and the importance of that. So that's happening on the conventional oil side. I think as we make advancements in drilling and completion technology, shale has the potential to make significant contributions to Alberta's natural gas supply and the economy, and we're continuing to move forward and understand that and how we can do it in the most environmentally friendly way. So I want to thank you for your attention. This has been a bit of a whirlwind presentation, recognizing that I'm the only thing between you and the coffee break. And I just wanted to reiterate that energy and resource production gives us a common cause. I think that's something that's really happened between Canada and the U.S. over many years. Canada and Alberta have significant natural resources that can play an important role in meeting global energy demand. And oil sands will continue to provide economic benefits across Canada and the U.S. And I should just say that currently in the mining of the oil sands, we produce about 1.2 million barrels a day. The in situ produces about 885,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. If you advance the clock forward, we'd expect to be producing 3.5 million barrels a day from surface mineable and about 5.5 million from in situ, further down the road. So it's a growing resource, and it's going to be a pretty good source of supply. So maintaining a strong relationship with our American neighbors is extremely important to Alberta. And Alberta is a key player in energy production, and it's imperative that really that decision makers and industry representatives hear the facts about our oil sands and the clean energy strategies that we've got underway. So I thank you for your attention. Do we have time for a couple of questions? Yeah. Okay. So I'm told we have time for 2 questions, and then we go into break. So I don't know if anybody wants.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. My name is Bami Shinoy, formerly with Conoco. I was really impressed with your chart. You proved what Mr. Mulva was talking regarding very little incremental production from your that. Now, I as an oil man completely convinced, but when I looked at why did Canada, with all this wonderful presentation that you have dropped out of Kyoto, because that gives a wrong impression like there is some problem.
Yeah.
And is that the reason for such a great opposition to the Keystone Pipeline? Because if people here, like I did today, I was really convinced that the oil sand is not going to produce all that greenhouse gases. But when I look at that you have dropped out of Kyoto, I was trying to connect. So if I am connecting as an oil man, just imagine the other people, how will they also be thinking about it?
Right.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And I think that our challenge with Kyoto was that Canada actually committed very quickly without really understanding what they were getting into and committed more than they could do by a long shot. What I've shown you really is that we have had a reduction in energy intensity in the oil sands by the 29% that I talked about. But in actual fact, and the environmentalists are the first ones to point this out, that our absolute emissions go up because we're developing the resource and we're producing more. And so the challenge that we're faced with is how do we help to offset the impact of that? And that's why in Alberta we're so adamant that we want to push ahead and develop carbon capture and storage. When I talked about the Quest project, which is the Shale one that's going into play, when they actually get that operational, their CO2 emissions per barrel on a barrel from the oil sands will be lower than a barrel of conventional crude oil. And so it's that kind of technology development that are going to enable us to do those things. But they're not, it's like any other technology. You can't flip the switch on and make it happen overnight, as I know you would well understand, having spent your career in the oil and gas industry. It takes time, and we've got to develop those things. They're very costly, but in my mind, carbon capture and storage is not unlike SO2 emissions and flue gas desulfurization that we all did in power plants in the early '80s when we went to do it. It was almost a deal breaker for the power generation. If you looked at it today, the costs have dropped dramatically. They're about 1/10 of what they were back in the very early days, and on average about half of what they were. So I think going forward we'll find the same thing with carbon capture and storage if we put the right horses behind it. Okay, I guess no other questions. Well, thank you very much.